This week, the UUA president, the Reverend Susan Frederick Gray, wrote a pastoral message in light of this season of holidays and holy days now beginning. This year, of course, all those celebrations and special occasions will be quite different from those of years past. Almost every UU congregation is following public health guidelines to keep our sanctuaries closed, especially given the rapidly rising number of coronavirus cases in just about every part of the country. And that means that we need to reimagine how we're going to do Christmas Eve. For example, given that we can't gather close together in candlelight and song. Joanne and I have been working on just that, by the way, figuring out what our Christmas Eve service will be like this year. This coming week, you'll be hearing more from us about decorating the tree and candles and a food drive, so keep an eye on your email and social media. Given the challenges of this particular holiday season, the UUA president notes that it is more important than ever to stay connected in the ways that we can do that, to let the people in our lives know how much we care about them. Zoom and other video conferencing and the telephone are not the same as being able to see our loved ones in person, but they do allow us to support one another, to listen to each other's stories and hopes across the distance. Something that is helping her, the Reverend Frederick Gray notes, is to stay in the present, remembering to take it one day at a time. When it's easy to be preoccupied with what we're missing or what we've lost during the pandemic, being mindful of what's in front of us and the blessings of our lives can help keep us going. And sometimes that means simply stopping for a little while. As Susan writes, my hope for each and every one of us in the midst of a season so often marked by hectic to-do lists and the recreation of some perfect holiday is that we give ourselves permission to rest, to simply be, rather than always doing, to tend to the grief and the joy that is part of our lives, to make room in our days for our spiritual care and renewal. Today is the second Sunday of Advent, and as we've been practicing it for the last decade, we lit the candle of faith on the Advent wreath. Now, while it's broadly accepted amongst faith traditions that light the Advent candles, that the first is for hope and the third and fourth are for joy and love, there is no such consensus for the second candle. For some, it's the candle of faith. For others, it's the candle of peace. And of course, there are good arguments to be made for both faith and peace as worthy values of this season. After all, faith, like hope, is an active part of preparing ourselves for the good news of Christmas, while peace, like joy, is an important part of that good news. In this materialistic world, though, peace is something that we also need even to survive the holidays. Let's face it, this is a stressful time of year, even when there's not a global pandemic. People may not be getting ready to travel to see extended family, but that means there's more decorating and other preparations going on at home. Rather than everyone descending on some poor relative who does most of the cooking, now we need to plan holiday meals for ourselves. And gifts still need to be purchased and cards still need to be written and so on and so forth. This is still a busy month for most people, just a different type of busy than it has been before. And so it's just as important as ever to find from time to time a little peace, a little quiet, a little stillness, to rest, to simply be, rather than always doing. I don't know about you, but the litany of craziness in this morning's reading by the Reverend Angela Herrera resembles a lot of my life recently. It's like an unfortunate checklist. Forgotten something at the store? Check. Missed an appointment? Check. Paid a bill late? Check. Haven't exercised? Check. I haven't put a metal spoon in the microwave yet, but the other morning, as I was helping Olivia get logged in for school, I did take one of her melatonin pills by mistake rather than my thyroid medication. Then I had to take my medication anyway, which made for an interesting morning of being both sleepy and buzzed at the same time. I've definitely felt like a tumbling leaf. Certainly moving from one house to another hasn't helped, but I've noticed that I've been losing things more often since I became a parent. I never used to lose things. It was a point of personal pride, in fact, that I never lost anything, not even a pen. Well, not anymore. I know I've tested Kirsch's patience the last couple of weeks, the number of times I've got to the office and realized I don't have my keys with me. So I spent a good couple of hours last week looking in every place where I thought I might have left them. In the kitchen, in the garage, in a particular moving box, which I swore was where I put my keys, in the pair of pants I last wore when I knew I had them with me. I even emptied my briefcase and the glove box in my car. And then, after looking in all of those other places, I found my keys hanging on a hook by the door, which was, of course, the most logical place for them to be. Now, the story about Elijah that the Reverend Herrera tells in her meditation is a favorite of ministers. This story comes from all of 2.5 verses in the first book of Kings in the Hebrew Bible, but much has been made of it. Mostly, I'm pretty sure, by ministers preaching to other ministers about how we all need to slow down and smell the roses or whatever grows on Mount Horeb. It was one of the texts for a sermon I heard by the Reverend James Forbes, the renowned senior minister emeritus of New York's Riverside Church, and he talked about how Elijah endured a windstorm and an earthquake and a wildfire before finally hearing the still small voice of the divine. And that hit home for me because not too long before, we'd had Hurricane Irene, the earthquake near Richmond, and the fire in the Great Dismal Swamp. So we all knew something about what it was like to endure the turmoil of that particular trifecta. In fact, they all happened in the space of 1 month. In the first book of Kings, it's repeatedly stated that the divine was not part of these events. There was a great wind so strong that it was splitting mountains and breaking rocks into pieces, but God was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but God was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but God was not in the fire. Finally, after the chaos has passed, Elijah hears a still small voice, a sound of sheer silence. As much as we might be drawn to paying attention to the dramatic and the powerful in our lives, it's very often not until we slow down and stop what we're doing so that we can simply be that we're able to pay attention to what is actually happening and hear the voice of the divine, if you will, or the spirit of life, if you prefer, or conscience or intuition. Maybe today, Angela Herrera writes, it will find you in a listening posture and will whisper to you. In my first sermon of the pandemic, back at the end of March, I offered some suggestions for what could help us get through the challenging time of chaos and turmoil that we knew lay ahead of us. Perhaps you might remember my first suggestion. Breathe. Just as I asked you to do then, breathe with me now if you would. Breathe in and breathe out. Many years ago, the best advice I ever got from a yoga teacher was, Don't stop breathing. It's easy, and we've all done it, when we're trying to do something difficult, when we're really focused on what we're doing, to hold our breath while we're making the effort. I don't know why we do that, because it doesn't help. Breathing is essential. In fact, the more effort you're making, the more you need to breathe. So don't forget to breathe. Breathe in and breathe out. Breathe in peace and breathe out love. Attending to our breathing is one way we can set aside all of our doing for a while, to put down the burden of the litany of craziness, the checklist of forgotten groceries and missed appointments and late bills and lack of exercise, and for a time, simply and mindfully be. Recently, my therapist recommended to me that I develop a practice of stopping what I'm doing every so often and simply breathe for a few minutes. I know there are benefits to doing this because I've seen it firsthand. The last time I was at my doctor's, it was, of course, a completely different setup for checking in and getting into the examining room. And then the nurse asked, "Have you been feeling stressed, anxious, hopeless, or angry recently?" And I said, "Who the hell hasn't?" Then it was time to take my pulse. And as I sat still, simply breathing, my heart rate decreased significantly down to my resting rate in under a minute. Now, I must admit that I haven't been that good at following my therapist's recommendations so far, but I am more aware when I'm feeling stressed, anxious, hopeless, or angry that I can help myself by setting aside the chaos and the doing for a little while and just breathing. The chaos and the doing will still be there, but I'll feel more able to handle them after a few minutes of stillness. There's a poem on the subject of stillness that I've loved since I first came across it, and I'm going to close out this sermon with it. It's by Pablo Neruda, the celebrated Chilean poet and politician, and it's entitled "Keeping Quiet." Now we will count to 12, and we will all keep still. For once on the face of the earth, let's not speak in any language. Let's stop for 1 second and not move our arms so much. It would be an exotic moment without rush, without engines. We would all be together in a sudden strangeness. Fishermen in the cold sea would not harm whales, and the man gathering salt would look at his hurt hands. Those who prepare green wars, wars with gas, wars with fire, victories with no survivors, would put on clean clothes and walk about with their brothers in the shade, doing nothing. What I want should not be confused with total inactivity. Life is what it is about. I want no truck with death. If we were not so single-minded about keeping our lives moving and for once could do nothing, perhaps a huge silence might interrupt this sadness of never understanding ourselves and of threatening ourselves with death. Perhaps the earth can teach us, as when everything seems dead and later proves to be alive. Now, I'll count up to 12, and you keep quiet, and I will go. As we continue our journey this Advent season, let's take the time once in a while to pause from doing. Let's embrace opportunities to set aside the busyness of the season, to be still, to open ourselves to the beauty of the world around us, and to listen to the silent spirit that dwells within us. For there is comfort and wisdom to be found when we embrace the peace that this season has to offer, both inside ourselves and beyond. May it be so.